Thank you, Ezra. And thank you to everyone for attending and giving me the opportunity to share. I'm going to start off by reading something from the big book and introducing what will eventually be the topic of the meeting. From page 84, love and tolerance of others is our code. And we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol. For by this time sanity will have returned. We will seldom be interested in liquor. If tempted, we recoil from it as from a hot flame. We react sanely and normally, and we will find that this has happened automatically. We will see that our new attitude toward liquor has been given us without any thought or effort on our part. It just comes. That is the miracle of it. The ultimate topic being love and tolerance of others. Quick disclaimer. I think this is obvious and yet still important to state, as the majority of you have never met me in person. I think it's important to note that while I will try to carry the message um, for this 20 minutes of my life, there also exists on every day, 24 other hours where I have the opportunity to practice these principles or not in all of my affairs. And my sincere hope is that if we ever have the good fortune of meeting in person, that you can judge my AA program and my character more heavily based upon how I treat you and how I treat other people. Um, with that being said, the line I pulled from the text comes right after step 10 is described in the big book, which involves like managing our daily interpersonal relations and our sanity or spirituality or whatever you want to call it. Um, how I treat others in my life, my coworkers, my wife, my family, my friends, is imperfect. And that is a pretty human experience I have found. Um, And there are opportunities to rectify that for me if I'm willing to have enough humility to do so. Conversely, the way that I see myself treated is also imperfect. And so when I'm working an AA program, I have both the opportunity to practice love and tolerance of others and, both with regards to my actions towards them, their actions towards me. And when that's the case, my life is more harmonious. And interestingly enough, I have had several cases in my life where I have been unloving and intolerant of certain people and have, for reasons of thinking that I've been slighted. And as it turns out, I have had behavior that has been, also not good in certain relationships. And that is a very humbling experience for me. Talking a little bit about my alcoholism, I began drinking when I was 13 years old, and I think I had a pretty typical alcoholic experience in that when I became drunk and I experienced the effects of alcohol, it was like smoothing off all of the rough edges of fear, anxiety, hate that I experienced in my life until I got to a certain drunkenness, and then all of those would potentially crop back up again. But for me, at the 13-year-old self time, all I cared about was the fact that if I drank this substance of alcohol, I felt okay and I felt better. not only that, I typically felt awesome. With drinking alcohol, I began to find surprisingly success in a lot of the places in my life where I had lost it. Um, I began to do better academically. I began to fit in more with friends, and I began to pursue activities that I was successful at. Also, when I was in high school, I did a like religious group that meant a lot to me and provided a lot of bountiful relationships and a foundation for spirituality. And I would also drink with these friends. So for me, the use of alcohol and drugs in my mind was pretty closely intertwined with living a spiritual existence, even though I would have situations crop up in my life where my actions were notably unspiritual. I also had times in my life where I would put myself in dangerous situations and receive feedback from friends and family, such as alcoholism runs in our family. You should be careful. You just got arrested last night. Why would you leave the house and go drink again? Why are you drinking and driving? Things like that. And the best way I can describe my understanding of those statements at the time was like someone was saying something completely irrelevant to me. It was like I would drink and go to the hospital and have to have my dad come pick me up, and he would lecture me, and it was as if he was saying the sky is green, grass is blue, concrete's red. It's like keep talking nonsense. I don't know why you're saying these things to me. Can you please stop? Um, my alcoholism was a very uh, like it was really helped by surface level things. Um, in my I got sober when I was 19, and in my 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, maybe not at that point, but for a while, everything on the outside in terms of like accolades in my life, my seeming physical health, everything seemed good. And because of that, I was pretty effective at manipulating my mom into letting me do whatever I wanted to, manipulating teachers and coaches into bending rules for me. Um, and part of my recovery today is uh, focusing a lot more strongly on interpersonal relationships rather than what other people think of me, which is just a blessing. Um, one story I'll share about the depths of my alcoholism because something I thought in my head the whole time I was drinking, even if I was doing dumb stuff, even if I was getting in trouble, even if I was hurting other people or being cruel to other people, I still had a thought in my head that I was a spiritual person and that I was doing my best in that regard. And when I was 17, I ended up getting this like spiritual tattoo, uh, of like a religious tattoo of some words. And a couple years later, I was taking a train to college. Someone I knew also happened to be on that train, and they were asking me about the tattoo. And I repeated, in when I got it at the time, it was something that was very meaningful to me, and it was a message that I believed in. And it was like I saw myself talking to this person, repeating the same words and knowing that they were totally BS, that they meant nothing to me anymore. And I was just propagating some sort of surface level veneer to justify ultimately what were pretty bad actions in my life. Um, when I got sober, it was a pretty big shock for me initially. I had taken a lot of drugs and started to experience like pretty brutal paranoia um, up through the end of my alcoholism, active alcoholism. And so being sober initially was just awesome because I didn't think people were reading my mind and controlling conversations on my thoughts. You know, it was like that was really my baseline. And it was like anything at this point is pretty cool with me. Um, and then I started having people in my life saying, "You look so much better. You're doing so great," patting me on the back, which is all great and supportive. And I appreciated it. And I started to think that because I'm sober and not actively destroying my life in a expedient manner, that people owed me something for that. And there was some level of like ego within there. And my best experiences with the 12 steps of alcoholism are as a tool of ego minimization and destruction. Um, to share another story, the first time uh, I made amends to my mom, um, I she was visiting me in a halfway house and asked me, "When are you going to make amends to me?" And I basically said more or less, "Here's your amends, go away," was basically what I thought were my amends. And I continued to carry a resentment that I would whine about pretty frequently. And I was uh, effective enough at painting myself as a victim that when most people would hear the stories I was telling, they would say, "Yeah, I understand why you're resentful." Um, which I think in many non-alcoholic cases is fine. But for me, it just gave me greater justification in feeling victimized and feeling justified in having a resentment. And so one time for a few years, would do this service commitment where we'd go into a dual diagnosis hospital where all of the patients there were adolescents and had attempted suicide before um, going into this facility. And so, with a commitment like that, it was pretty easy to see people who have had a hard time in life and to do my best to carry the message. Me and my friends at the time did this commitment, went out to dinner after, and I started my normal round of complaining about my resentment. And at some point, he more or less said, "Please shut up. Do you want to write inventory about it?" And I said, "I've already done that. I've already written inventory." And he said, "Please shut up. Do you want to write inventory about it?" And so I said, "Fine." Because for the first time, someone was quite literally unwilling to hear me out on complaining and basically said, "You need to leave. Like, I'm going to leave, or you can take a different action." And so we went back to my house and I wrote inventory. He sat there with me, and it was a really, really flooring experience because I had not taken a searching and fearless moral inventory of the situation. And suddenly things began to come into my consciousness in my mind that I did, ways in which I behaved that were uncool, to put it a certain way. And I started to feel empathy, and I started to feel, regret, sympathy, whatever. And it was like, wow, this wasn't a perfect situation for me growing up, and I did not help it. And so the next day, I called my mom and said, hey, I want to recognize that, like, I used to do all this stuff, and I wanted to say, I'm sorry and do what I can to make it right. And she was like, thank you, as if the feeling I got from the conversation was, she'd been kind of waiting for that to some degree. Like she knew it the whole time, but was loving and tolerant of me enough to not press that issue, even though I was acting, excuse my language, like an asshole for years. I've had enough humbling experiences in my life where I can pretty confidently say that if I'm getting upset or angry or especially hateful about a situation, there is a very, very high likelihood that I am making mistakes in that situation, and then I've had a part to play in that. And a kind of another side of the same coin there is that it has given me, like, I've made enough mistakes in my life where I have an opportunity to be forgiving and to be loving and tolerant of other people who are making mistakes, period. And that is not always an easy thing. It's not always uh, yeah, it's not always the easiest thing to do. And it takes some level of humility for me to, proud, sober for 12 years, have these accomplishments, me to say, you know what, I'm going to let this go. Or, you know what, I'm going to figure out what I'm doing here. Because throughout my recovery, I have had periods where I refused to do that. And I would get bitter and spiteful. And suddenly my life became stressful and miserable. And if you're new to recovery, first off, welcome and thank you for being here. And second off, at least in my experience, there's nothing worse than being completely uh, restless, irritable, and discontented and not have a way to run away from it. Because alcohol was a nearly foolproof solution where if I was acting poorly, I could just get completely blacked out drunk and at the best, or at the worst, the next day I'll be so hungover that I can't even think about it. But as a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, there is still the opportunity to do things that I feel ashamed of, and I don't have that excuse. I'm sorry, don't remember it. I was blacked out, you know? Um, that's all I have to say. Thanks for letting me share. Again, the topic for tonight is love and tolerance of others. Pass.